we'll see. Changes every day. Seems like it changes every 3 weeks. We've talked a lot about sentiment, people thinking one thing about the market, maybe different from reality. The survey of consumers from the University of Michigan, what came out specifically right here, we have their trade policy and expected consumer spending. This is interesting because if we go through, there's a lot of interesting takeaways. All consumers. So it breaks out the age range, which there's some interesting differences. But those who will spend as usual, and so these responses are May through July 2025. All consumers will spend as usual. Only 24% of consumers are going to spend as usual. 58% will cut back spending, and 13% will stop. Now, there's some deviation between, the older you are, typically you're going to be in a better income monetary situation. So the older you are, you're more willing to spend a little bit more, like we're the 18 to 44 age cohort. 22% are going to spend as usual, where 65 and older, 31 are going to spend as usual. Income, the lower third, 18% are going to spend as usual versus 31 that are going to spend as upper third, 31% are going to spend as usual. Pretty much the vast majority, everyone is saying we got to cut back a little bit. We've got to cut back. That's good for inflation. That's not necessarily good for a potential recession. Now, going down even deeper, this was, I just thought fascinating. Inflation expectations. It breaks out the cohorts that said they were either going to spend as usual, cut back, or stop. Of those who are going to stop spending, which I don't know how you stop spending, but you're just absolutely going to stop spending. They believe inflation expectations for the next year, inflation is going to be at 9.8%. We were just talking earlier how in reality it's probably 2% in reality. CPI says it's 3%. They're saying it's going to be more than 3x. It is not even in reality. I mean, 5x of what it probably is in reality. Those who say we're going to cut back, which is the majority of respondents in the survey, think that inflation in 1 year is going to be 5.4%, which is double what inflation really is today, a little bit less than double, according to CPI. We'll spend as usual. They're actually right on the dot of what CPI says inflation is at 2.9%. They believe that it's going to drop down. All of the cohorts think it's going to be a little bit less inflation over the next 5 to 10 years. But again, the will stop spending folks, they think we're going to have 9% inflation for the next 5 to 10 years. And then of those groups, those expecting unemployment to rise next year, unsurprisingly, the will stop folks, 79% of them think that unemployment is going to rise next year. 65% for those who think that they're going to cut back on spending. Only 40% or 39% of those are going to spend as usual think unemployment is going to rise next year. It doesn't necessarily bode well for those inflation expectations, because as we mentioned, if you think that things are going to be more expensive, you will front load those purchases, just like we saw in Q1 of this year, those businesses, just like you were describing earlier, Addison, of hey, it's going to be more expensive. Let's buy as much as we can right now. And it leads to this binge buying, because it's I got to get all now because the price is going to go up. I just got to hoard a bunch of stuff right now. And it becomes lumpy. And again, it can really start throwing off some of these inflation numbers. So this is talking about, do you favor advance buying? And more people favor advance buying today, 30%, yes, buy now, than in 1979, 1981, or in 2022. That's wild to me.
So I was only alive for one of those periods prior to 2025 where they can explain that. So I'm sure anybody that's listening to this that was around in 79 or 81 can very easily correct me. I don't have a feel for what the economic situation was there. I think the increase, even from just from 2022, I think a lot of that has to be tariff infused. And maybe people that just don't have an understanding of it, or there's been so much hype around
it.
You
think in 2025?
Then in 2025, I'm wondering that uptick has less to do with the overall economy and more of just people have said a bunch of stuff about tariffs, and you feel like you got to do something now because of
people talking about milk and eggs.
Right. So I wonder for that specific jump, I'm wondering if that's the case. And I almost feel like that is the case just based on just how things get talked about. But
if you would ask, we have to go back and we can look at this survey from even in years, prior to the pandemic, prior to COVID, in the mid, 2010s, call it 2017, 2018, when we almost had no inflation. You could easily find people that say, no, actually inflation's about 10%.
Oh yeah. And
there was a lot of that. I'm like, I know what you're saying, because where they're coming from is like, well, we're doing all this quantitative easing, we're printing all this money, things are more expensive. Like, you just don't see it. They're reporting fake numbers. Inflation's actually at 10%.
Going up to the initial, the first section that we were looking at, I think we're always reading reports and we're always monitoring stuff that the Fed's doing. And so we kind of live in this world. And I'm sure people that are listening to this and have heard my rambling think even I probably don't have an understanding of it. But in a lot of ways, I think we underestimate how people, one, how much they even care or check up on economic news, and also like where they're hearing it. Because
what are you talking about?
Well,
everyone subscribed to the Great Report, Addison.
I'm just thinking of like when we were talking before recording of the survey that Trepp read around this time last year of people that thought 50% of the survey thought that we were at all-time highs in unemployment, and it's like it's quite damn near quite the opposite.
So this is like the vibe session all over again. It's like just the vibes aren't right.
I don't necessarily want to go that far, but I am wondering truly where majority of the people do get their economic news or feelings, because I remember.
Where do you think?
Quite frankly, I think they get it from whatever political podcast they listen to. If they do.
I think it might be being generous that you think that the majority of people are listening to political podcasts.
Well,
which I think a lot do.
I don't necessarily think it has to be political podcasts, but I think where news media is right now, I think people are going, we've created a large environment of, if you don't like what you hear, there's somewhere where you can go to find what you want.
You're just going to go get the narrative that aligns with your worldview.
But
you think how much? You think a lot of it's? Do you think? I have to get some numbers on podcast uptake, but I'm assuming that social media is playing a big role also, or is this like is just Gen Z off social media now and only doing podcasts?
No, I think social media plays an outsized. Yeah, I still think social media plays a pretty outsized role in overall sentiment of economic issues and, quite frankly, other issues. But I remember going back to kind of around the same time frame last year, just before the election, and was meeting a friend downtown Indianapolis, and it was the day of the big Taylor Swift tour, and downtown was packed.
Yeah,
and I get it; she's a big draw, but those tickets were, I don't think the cheapest ticket was what, $1,200.
I don't think.
If
as someone who was basically in the nosebleed seat, and I paid a lot more than $1,200 for the ticket, unfortunately.
And so
they were expensive.
As I said earlier, I don't want to pick one event, but it's weird to hear, at that time, it was weird to hear people say, like, we can't afford gas, we can't afford eggs, and that you're downtown Indianapolis, and it's like people are paying nosebleed seats for $1,500 for this concert.
Well, and part of that could just be the bifurcation of the stratification of the economy. The wealthy are getting wealthier because they're allocated assets, and assets have done well, versus folks if not allocated assets probably haven't been able to keep up. Wages have been outpacing inflation recently, but over the last couple decades, not as much. And purchasing power has been eroded from inflation and all that.
Not just to, I guess, double down on that concert, but I think of how many people have mentioned, went on this vacation in 2024, or
people are still spending money.
And that was one to me that was always like, okay, I'm told the economy's bad.
Can't be that bad.
But the actual actions that are happening on would not indicate that you're worried about when if the next paycheck is going to come.
Yeah. And, you know, as anecdotal as that is, because it's a complete anecdote, right? It could be a fluke. Some of those like flashes, when you see something like that, it can be much more accurate and leading indicator than any economic report that you're going to see. I mean, in COVID, I remember going out to dinner when like lockdowns were like it was on the edge of like it was post lockdown, but everyone was, you know,
worried about it happening.
Kind of worried, kind of worried about it. Then we went out to dinner. I'm like, this place is packed.
Yeah,
I'm like, the parking lot's full. This restaurant is full. I'm like, people have money and they're spending it and they're going out, and this economy is on fire. Now it was too much fire because the money printer was going burr and the helicopters were flying around dumping money out of the helicopters everywhere. So there was so much money sloshing around the system that was much more in line with than what the numbers were showing at that point in time. And you're right. I mean, there was a lot of wealth that was sloshing around. There still is a good amount of wealth. There's psychology that will say people just keep spending money until they don't have the money. And so how much of it also was, it's like, well, we're used to spending a lot. Maybe we're not making as much money, but, you know, we're still in the habit of, you know, we haven't actually made that adjustment to our budget.
Well, and where part of that, I guess, confusion or disconnect for me came was, you know, my family has a lake house up in the northwest corner of Illinois, near Iowa and Wisconsin. And that summer of 2022, when inflation really ticked up, everybody was like, you couldn't turn on the news without hearing about how bad inflation was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember at the end of the summer asking my dad, like, how's the crowd up there? How was it? And he was like, the lake was pretty dead all summer. And he was like, you know, it's because a lot of people driving, you know, if you're from the Chicago area and it's a 2 or 3 hour drive to get up there. How many, you know, given how high gas prices are going, on top of gas for the boat,
for everything else,
how many of those people just said, that summer I'm pulling back? So you see that in 2022, and then in 2024,
the people with lake houses are pulling back from the driving up for their gas.
I thought that too, but I feel like a big part of growing up is realizing that just because people have something doesn't mean that they can afford it and pay it all cash.
That is true.
But you take a look at that in 2022 to then go to 2024 where people are like, you know, we went here for spring break and then we did this for the summer. But the price of eggs, it's like,
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
The math isn't mathing.
No. And yeah, it's the price of eggs, it's the price of milk, and it's everyone's personal, you know, experience. And it's hard to say. And it feels like we just don't have the words or the descriptions or the labels to describe what's been going on in the economy. You know, we have, you know, recession, we have inflation, you know, stagflation, which is kind of it's called soft stagflation, but we're basically been sort of a soft stagflationary-ish environment, I think, for, you know, a little while, going in and out of it, of a little bit inflation here, but kind of just sluggish growth. But, you know, that term hadn't really been invented or described until the 1970s. And sometimes I think, you know, taking a step back and saying, you know, modern economics is pretty new. You know, it's really kind of less than 100 years old. It's been less than 100 years since we've actually been like off the gold standard. You know, the Federal Reserve is like a little bit older than 100 years old. So like, I'm not saying that it's all an experiment, but we're still kind of in this phase of like, we only have so much history. I mean, you know, the expansion of, you know, the federal government in the 60s, you know, again, that's a relatively newer way of doing business. I mean, the Department of Education was, you know, stood up in like the mid 80s, and we live in the world where it's like we think that these institutions have been around forever, but just the economic paradigm that we're living in is still relatively new, and it's like it just because it doesn't fit the standard definition of a recession doesn't mean that things are perfect and smooth sailing.
if you want even a newer example of that, I want to say it was like first Trump administration. It was still the belief of like if unemployment ever gets below 5%, like you can't like at 5%, like that everybody has a job at 5. Like it can't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've been below.
We've been
5.
under it for.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, modern monetary theory kind of got like a shot on the last cycle of like, hey, look, we can print money. If it doesn't create inflation, print it, spend it, all good. And if you see some inflation, then bump up a couple taxes here and there. You're fine. Now, COVID, I think we had a reminder post-COVID, because we did print so much money. I think everyone kind of thought that might have been the case, and went back to the great financial crisis, and we're like, oh, we could have made this smoother for everybody if we had gone in even heavier than we did. So let's go in heavy. Let's, pump the system full of money. Basically the whole economy turned off. So it's like, we're just filling a hole. But the result was we had a little bit of inflation. Now, supply chains certainly contributed to that. Increasing the money supply by like 2 or 3x also probably had something to do with it also. I think we're still learning all these lessons. And we're relying on a committee, the FOMC, who are mere mortals. They're people, and I think they're smart people, but I don't think anybody knows. But we've got one group that's going to make the decision on what the cost of money is going to be. And they're using data that is largely not accurate. Not to go back to that, as we do every week.
No, but that's a calming way of thinking of things.
You can't control it. Just don't worry about it. It's fine. It's all good. Smoother heads will prevail. They know. They're smart people.
Yeah. I mean, that, and also that is something that has been really, it's been interesting to read, because post-COVID and after that round of stimulus, people did talk about that a lot, of what worked and didn't work in that round, and also comparing it to the great financial crisis. And that did seem to be, I don't want to say the prevailing thought, but it wasn't all that uncommon to hear people say, like, we probably would have been better off if we did a lot of these things in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, like lessons learned, and yeah.
But, I mean, one, I was a lot younger when the great financial crisis happened, but I guess something that is really hard for me to wrap my head around is with COVID, is a sense of like, okay, there's certain functions of the economy we need to shut off because it was deemed a public health risk. And as soon as we get this virus under control, in all hopes or in all seriousness, you'd think that would come back. So you need some like pumping money into, to the economy and giving money to people of like, no, still go to, well, I should say still go to the movies, but still spend as you were going to.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to see how that would have necessarily like played out with how the great financial crisis was, because it was like a 2 or 3 year period of like just high unemployment. Mm-hmm. That economy was not great. And so how long were we going to have to pump money into the economy to give people money to spend while not having any like better job prospects in a 6 to 12 month horizon?
Yeah, and again, it's like who are you pumping the money to? Is it done in the form of stimulus checks? Or that was one of the lessons learned, is that and the criticism is that the great financial crisis, like they did print a bunch, they did hand a bunch of money, but they just gave it to some banks. There was TARP. They basically were like, Bank of America, here's a big, you take it. You don't have a choice. Take this money. We're going to give you these grants, and they just spit out money to all these institutions who were the ones that maybe caused a lot of the problems, and they got bailed out, and essentially everyone who was just working in the economy, normal person, got completely hosed. And so this round they were like, well, let's hook everybody up with some stimulus checks, in the sense that like that may be as impactful or more, and relatively marginal in terms of like a budget. It's like, well, we could do this for just a couple $100 million versus $1 trillion. Let's just give everybody a check. And Donald Trump's like, I can put my name on it, and everyone's going to think it's great. And it was certainly fine for the multifamily because everyone could pay rent. Never had collection rates so high, and occupancy, went to the roof. So it's a lesson learned, but I again, and I think that other than the inflationary impact, and it's like we're going to give you a $400 check today, but your purchasing power over the next couple of years is going to decrease by thousands of dollars. So it's like a little bit of help today, but we're actually going to have an invisible tax over the next couple of years because we're going to we're giving you debt, we're giving you this cash as we're issuing bonds, and we're taking those Federal Reserve notes and sending them over to you to be able to hand to your landlord, who's going to hand them back to the bank, and it's going to kind of come full circle. So it's, I don't know. I don't want a recession to be horrible for everybody. I do feel as though people who made bad business decisions should not be rewarded and continue to just be able to make bad business decisions. It creates a moral hazard, moral failure, and I think we create a more fragile overall economy that can cause more economic pain and hardship to everyday people in the long run.
You think about how it ties into real estate cycles, like that does need to happen. Right? It
needs to be a cycle. You have to have you can't upend the cycle. Just average it out. It's not good for anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.